In the past few days, there's been a story emerging in Oregon about an Antifa activist who lost their life. Following this, several anti-fascists showed up and vandalized the Democratic Party of Oregon headquarters. And in a stunning turn, the executive director of the Oregon Democrats has essentially defended the behavior, saying people are mourning and it's just paint. But some of this paint includes incitement, direct statements calling for extreme acts against police. When I saw this statement from this Democrat, I was kind of shocked. Certainly this should be the line where they say, no, don't write that on our building. Instead, no. He said, it's just paint. And I started wondering, why would he say this? Is it possible he believes fake news and is willing to downplay these calls to action? Or is it possible that many on the left are simply being, in effect, held hostage by the far left? In reality, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I believe that there are many people, not just Democrats, who are terrified of cancel culture and the outrage mob, so they refuse to say anything. In Portland, for instance, we know that often police are scared to act because it could anger these extremists. Perhaps this Democratic Party official knew that if he actually stood up to the vandalism, the violence, and the extremism, they would target him, and thus he tacitly defends what they're doing. But admittedly, there is a bit of propaganda at play. Yesterday, Project Veritas exposed insider information from CNN. And of course, many people are trying to downplay it as though, oh, it's not breaking news, it's not important information. Listen, Jeff Zucker, the president of CNN, who dictates the coverage of the channel, called Fox News fake conspiracy nonsense. The problem is he referenced Ron Johnson, who cited Politico, not Fox News. It's a bit complicated, but the point I'm trying to make is even the president of CNN, who is telling his staff what to cover, doesn't know what's actually happening. So in effect, they're in this cycle where they consume their own propaganda. You then end up with a mix of scenarios. If CNN openly on the air defends Antifa from their highest personalities to their guests, well, then people in the Democratic Party of Oregon are going to say, hey, look, if this is what people like, if this is what mainstream America supports, who are we to call it out? And you end up with extreme calls to action being defended. I'm trying to avoid saying, talking about exactly what was shown. But you basically know what it is. They're critical of the police to an extreme degree, and there is an incitement. And the Democrats at this point have become so, I guess, weak and blinded by the fake news, they're just going to support it. Now, the debate is tonight. So I'm going to go through a bit of relevant information, starting with this particular story about what happened in Portland, Oregon. I'm going to be moving very quickly through it, though, because admittedly, YouTube makes my job hard. So let's do this. Let's get started with this story. Graffiti to stay as people mourn Portland activist. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's a PayPal option, a crypto option, a physical address. But of course, the best thing you can do is just share this video, especially as tonight is the debate. There's a lot we need to talk about as it pertains to the Democrats, their defense of this extremism, their push far left, and the media bias that is fueling all of it. Now, the first story is you get the gist of it. I told you, right? So in this graffiti all over the Democrat building, we have this man. His name is Brad Martin. He is the executive director of Oregon Democrats. He says it's just paint, talking about the graffiti on the Democratic Party of Oregon building and why they see it as part of the grieving process. Sure, I can understand that it's part of the grieving process. The problem is some of the graffiti was overt calls to action and incitement. While many people might look at it and say, oh, it's just a standard phrase said by Antifa, it's okay, fine, but they shouldn't be saying that stuff. They shouldn't be calling for violence, and we should tolerate that. We went through a whole cycle where a scene from the film Kingsman was outrageous, that it appeared on a tiny screen at a conference in a side room. Somebody saw it, and they said it was unacceptable. Even the president condemned it. Fine, I'll accept that. I think Kingsman was a great movie, and I understand, yes, it's graphically violent, but it's a movie. Calm down, everybody. It was a commercial smash hit, $500 million. But when it comes to Antifa, spray painting these calls to action on a building, The Democrat actually comes out and defends it. That blows my mind. And I'm going to have to point to the media. Check this story out. Democratic rep calls Antifa members peaceful protesters during CNN interview. This is from August 19th. When I started seeing this picture, I started to realize perhaps what we're seeing is, I don't know, are the Democrats being held hostage essentially? Are they worried these people will damage them, or are they concerned they will lose the vote of the far left? And I believe there's a mix here. CNN is driven by ratings, and we'll come to this later in the segment, but Project Veritas has a new segment out, and I don't want to act like it's the biggest breaking story in the world, but they are pulling the curtain back and giving us a look into the mentality of the people who work for these networks and why they promote certain views. CNN has not been shy about their push towards the far left. In fact, even CNN contributors have been calling out the extremism. It seems like, perhaps to use a statement from a CNN host, there are cracks starting to form in their narrative. Now look, we've seen Antifa defended by CNN. We've seen, I believe it may have been Jake Tapper. I don't want to get the person wrong. Maybe it was Cuomo. I'm not sure. But their hosts have defended Antifa, comparing them to the soldiers on D-Day. But they're going out committing acts of violence, vandalism, and extremism. But for some reason, they are courting this. And I think one of the issues is that many of the younger far-left activists openly support Antifa and openly support the violence. But the Democrats want their votes. In turn, CNN caters to it, and CNN, consuming their own propaganda, pushes out the absurd fake news. Check out this story, and then we'll walk backwards a little bit. CNN contributor, LGBTQ town hall showed radicalism that drives the Democrats. This is an op-ed from a contributor to CNN pointing this out. As I said, maybe cracks are starting to form, and we can see that if you live in this world of CNN, and you don't consume news outside of it, you are eating your own propaganda and probably believing in this fictitious world where Antifa are really heroes and not the crazy extremists who have no principles and are guided by nothing. Now, I want to stress before we get into the story, LGBTQ town hall, at its core, excellent, appreciated, and fine. The idea that we can have a conversation in defense of the LGBTQ community is incredible, it's important, and I hope we can further protect civil liberties, because that's what this country has always been about. Our founding documents, our Bill of Rights. We have done poor things in the past, but what I mean is that over time we've expanded those civil liberties. So these conversations are important. The problem is how CNN plays the game. I've criticized CNN several times over the past few days over this town hall, because it seems they were more interested in highlighting more extreme behavior, bringing in personalities who are going to drive ratings, instead of actually talking about what Americans are concerned about. Some of the criticism we saw from the GOP, very obvious. But we did see some never-Trumpers say, why are you having this town hall when we need to defeat Donald Trump? Interestingly, you would think that CNN, being driven by ratings, would actually talk about things most Americans would care about. But this shows they consume their own propaganda. This is exactly why you see them then praising Antifa. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk backwards a little bit. I want to talk a bit about this idea that the left is being held hostage to an extent before we move on to CNN's role in contributing to this hostage negotiation. Here's the thing. In order for Antifa and the far left to actually exert pressure, there has to be this perspective that it exists in the mainstream. That means the more CNN defends these extreme positions, the more regular Americans view it as legitimate mainstream society, so when Antifa comes and points the finger at them, they bend over backwards. The fear? The media, not necessarily the activists. The activists can make all the phone calls in the world, they can vandalize your building, and yes, that will put pressure on people. That will increase the cost of doing business. But when it appears on CNN, and they say, no, CNN, Antifa were just peaceful protesters, well, then you will find regular leftists and Democrats being held in submission, knowing that if they speak out and say enough of this, they will be attacked in the press. Let me give you a few examples. Check out this story. Hashtag delete Facebook trends after report says Zuckerberg secretly dined with conservatives. Secretly? I'm not a fan of Mark Zuckerberg. The opposite. I am a critic of Mark Zuckerberg. But now you got me defending Zuckerberg. Dude, it's not secret. He said, he goes on to say that I don't know where his quote is, He points out he regularly... Okay, I got it. To be clear, I have dinners with lots of people across the spectrum. Meeting new people and hearing from a wide range of viewpoints is part of learning. If you haven't tried it, I suggest you do. That's not controversial in the least bit. I am sick of this. They call everyone controversial just because these crazy far leftists deem it so, but CNN needs to be called out for legitimizing this extremism, plain and simple. Listen, you are not going to see conservatives, and you are not going to see moderates outraged that Mark Zuckerberg is talking to anybody. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Mark Zuckerberg met with Black Lives Matter. Now, you do see criticism when people show Jack Dorsey with Black Lives Matter activists, and they say, aha, this proves their bias. But what else do you see beyond that? Do you see people saying delete Twitter? No, they're on Twitter demanding they be allowed back on the platform. You see the inversion here. While there are people criticizing the CEO of Twitter for meeting with these activists saying, aha, it proves their bias, in response, they say, we demand you allow us back on the platform. That's not a threat to Jack Dorsey. That's a demand that you let conservatives and moderates use your product. But when it comes to Mark Zuckerberg, they say, no, just delete it outright because he spoke with conservatives. That's the inversion. The way I've framed it in the past, I use Sargon of Akkad as an example. If you're not familiar with Sargon, he is a liberalist commentator, typically finds himself more aligned with the centrists and the conservatives, for the most part. Like the overwhelming majority of instances, for sure. He's an anti-feminist critic. But I argue this. When it comes to the Democratic Party headquarters, will Sargon and his cohorts be showing up with spray paint and weapons? Of course not. But Antifa and the far left will. And Antifa also has allies in media in these youth areas, like in younger digital media. And that's why you will see people essentially held hostage to this. It is not the conservatives. It is not the moderates angry with Ellen DeGeneres. Now, I was critical of Ellen DeGeneres. Why? Because I actually lean left. My criticism was not that she was hanging out with George Bush, but that she elevated the fact that she was sitting next to him to being friends with him. The point is, even my criticism is rather tepid. Like, look, man, just be polite. We'll learn to get along. You don't got to act like you're friends. And if you are, fine. You don't have to be friends with people you don't like. And therein lies the big problem. So long as CNN is willing to cater to the far left, defend them, you will then see the Democrats defending them. And here's the big mistake they make. From Town Hall, CNN came in last for ratings during their entire LGBTQ town hall. There were many instances that became viral, clickbait, outrageous, and it's because, in my opinion, CNN purposefully chooses people that they know will generate ratings. I don't think they looked for they choose who their guests are, and they knew what they were going to get. A protest erupted at CNN. How did those people bring in their flags? Does CNN not have any security? I don't believe that. I've seen CNN security. It's pretty legit. I don't believe that they allow people to come in with bags. I have been to these town halls and these debates. I believe that CNN chose their guests, and that's my main criticism of them. But in the end, they still don't get the ratings they need. Now, this brings me to the next point. And I will stress that the reason we are now segueing further into CNN is because the debates are tonight, hosted by CNN, but I will get to, the bigger Democratic picture in a second. I'm going to do something I don't like doing, but I have to do anyway. I'm going to be blurring the next article, which I'll pull up now. The reason I'm doing it is because there is such intense scrutiny over Project Veritas that simply showing some of the names that they've, of the people that they've gotten statements from undercover could result in this video being deleted from YouTube. It has happened before. But I want to read from you some important facts from some important details from the latest Veritas expose. This is part 2. CNN leadership and staffers reveal true sentiments. Network picks favorites among Democratic candidates on eve of debate. Now, many people may say, well, of course, behind the scenes, people have different opinions. Others might say, well, of course, CNN chooses who they want to highlight. The first and most important issue is that people on CNN should not have public and private positions. They should be telling us the truth. If behind the scenes they say one thing and then on TV say another, we've got a serious problem with our news industry. So I'll give a shout out to Bill Maher. This is the point he was making. He says this all the time. Behind the scenes, we make off-the-cuff comments, we make offensive jokes, and we should be able to say these things. We should. Reality is important. But here we can see that in one segment, a certain journalist talks about how Joe Biden does look shady, that it is essentially soft corruption. He says it's not illegal. But these are opinions you don't hear when it comes to television because they're obsessed with Trump. And therein lies the big problem. Jeff Zucker wants the story to be Trump instead of Joe Biden or Hunter Biden. Shouldn't we be talking about the facts? In the end, we end up seeing someone like Jeff Zucker, the president of CNN, who doesn't follow actual news. He just follows the same. Here's the problem. How can you be informed when you dictate to your staff, cover this, and then you consume that information, assuming it's all true? That's a serious problem. They're creating a cycle of propaganda, and then other outlets pick up CNN stories and regurgitate them. But the other big important issue about how they choose favorites shows us that when they're in that cycle of propaganda, of course, so I'll say this first. They say, they don't like Tulsi for a variety of reasons. Andrew Yang is polling in 6th place. If they're only going to highlight the establishment candidates, well, they're CNN. People follow their lead. Even if their ratings are relatively low, people still follow CNN's lead. So if they're not going to highlight someone like Andrew Yang or Amy Klobuchar, how are they supposed to break out? Only through the power of digital media, of social media, has Yang been able to reach that high level using hashtags and viral trends, now forcing CNN to recognize this. The problem emerges when CNN only reports on what they react to, but the cycle is being set by CNN and others who follow CNN. You see the problem? Now, it would be fine. It's interesting. I don't set the news cycle. Tim Pool does not set the news cycle. I'm sorry. I am not big enough to do so. But CNN does in many ways. If they're consuming their own news, they're ignoring these candidates, they are propping up Antifa and the far left, you can see how this cycle is spinning out of control. Imagine playing a game of telephone with yourself. You see in the news, they say, Joe Biden did nothing wrong. And then you're going, well, why should we bother covering it? So then you go on the phone to all of your staff and say, don't cover this, he did nothing wrong. So then you say that, and then your employees say, okay. And then in a passive moment, they say Joe Biden didn't do anything wrong. And then you hear that same news, you see what's happening. So when CNN comes out and says Antifa good, when CNN comes out and favors and does these town halls showing the more bombastic personalities who protest and make the left and Democrats look crazy, don't be surprised then when it comes to the Democrats and they're choosing woke Twitter and college campuses over the American people. And that's the most important point. But it wouldn't be fair if I didn't actually point out that CNN actually is both inept and corrupt. And I'll give you some examples. In this story, CNN failed to disclose Warren Town Hall questioner was maxed out donor. That's right. At their recent LGBTQ town hall, this is the point I'm making about them picking and choosing and trying to make viral moments. I was right. They're making people look bad because it serves their bottom line. That's the other important takeaway from the Project Veritas story, that they're driven by a profit motive, that they don't care about what the facts are, they care about what will be a good segment. We hear that from a statement from Jeff Zucker. Well, take a look at this. The LGBTQ town hall did have some viral moments, even though the ratings were low. It turns out one of these guys was a maxed out donor to Warren, and they didn't know? You mean to tell me that one of the guys you brought on to ask a question to Warren in this viral moment, you didn't know who he was? Okay, then, we have two options. You're either extremely inept or you knew and decided not to tell anybody. I'm going to have to go with they knew and decided not to tell anybody until they got called out for it. Well, actually, I don't even know if they've said anything. But check this out. In February, CNN didn't disclose Democratic Party ties to questioners in Sanders' town hall. That's right. A bunch of extremely critical questions thrown at Bernie Sanders. It turns out they came from DNC employees and linked personalities. That's a conflict of interest. Where was the disclosure? Because to me, for one thing, CNN is overtly partisan and we know it. If Jeff Zucker, behind the scenes, is saying Fox News is fake news, well, we get it. You didn't do any research. You're just a partisan. Fox News is biased and so is CNN. That's fine. Let's be real, right? We know. But I'll tell you what, man, I got to admit, Tucker Carlson does a good job of pointing these things out, and I can't argue when he's being reasonable. He's not always reasonable. He's not perfect. I don't think anyone would assume he is. But the other night, he mentions he's not going to go after Rachel Maddow. She just has an opinion, and that's fine. She has a different opinion than him. And that's, what am I going to say? Well, oh, yeah, that's a good point. She does. Now I'll criticize her for being wrong and pushing conspiracies, and I've criticized Tucker Carlson as well. But he makes a good point. What about CNN? I'm sorry. According to the latest leak, or a whistleblower video, what we're learning is, again, let me do this. Let me show you the criticism they've levied at Project Veritas. CNN says, no one in Project Veritas expose CNN sting is a CNN journalist. That's a complete non sequitur. It has nothing to do with Veritas released. What it was is internal employees and their opinions based on first-hand experiences of what's going on at CNN. Well, of course, not everybody who works at CNN is a journalist. Their support staff, their coordinators, their bookers, their satellite technicians, whatever. Not everybody's a journalist, but they do work at CNN and they do see this firsthand. And what they see is overt bias. In one of the phone calls, you can see that Jeff Zucker is saying, Kamala Harris is talking about suspending Trump. It's not going to happen. But hey, why don't we talk about it anyway? Why? That for me was a side segment because censorship is a big issue for me. Now, I think it's okay, fine. Look, if CNN wants to talk about it, I get it. But in the end, let me just wrap everything back together. For one, I want to make sure I point out their criticism has nothing to do with what Veritas is showing us. What we can see, though, is that CNN is playing this cyclical game where they're telling themselves their own news, but the employees can even see through it. Bernie Sanders fans can see through it. In the end, CNN is driven just by profits. But I want to make sure I wrap this all back into the main segment of the video because, I'll tell you exactly how I do this. When I see the news, I try and figure out how things, flow together. I try to see, in what way is this related? And when I saw the story about, when I saw Veritas's release and when I saw the Democrats praising and defending Antifa, I had a few thoughts. Why are they doing this because they really believe it? And I believe the answer is to an extent, yes, because CNN is propping up these individuals because they're catering to a group who they think is more likely to support them in the long run. But then it's also the holding of hostage. And I guess the reason why I'm highlighting all of these things together is to put it like this. When it comes to cancel culture and woke outrage, activists aren't enough. You need bad press. And CNN's support of Antifa, the instances they have supported it, provide legitimacy. You'll end up with local Democrats saying, is this legitimate? Will the media make me look bad? And if Antifa has been repeatedly praised by CNN, well, then sure enough, you're going to find people saying, who am I to cross that line outside the Overton window? CNN provides the mainstream cover for what Antifa does. And then at the lower level, local officials and Democrats are just going to be like, I don't want to be outside this Overton window. I want to be what's socially acceptable. And if you have activists telling you, do it or else, and they're vandalizing your property and you don't want to agitate them, and you have CNN saying, hey, everyone supports them, then who are you to step out of line? And this brings me back to the whistleblowers within CNN. This individual, Kerry Porch, he is one of these people who is seeing it all happen around him and eventually says, enough. You can hear it from these other individuals who work at this company. They see through it too. Eventually, someone has to step through the fire and say, I don't care anymore. Am I going to be ostracized? Am I going to be ridiculed? I don't know, but enough is enough. And it's about time we had Democrats stand up to CNN. Tulsi Gabbard threatened to boycott the Democratic debate. Ultimately, she didn't. She'll be on tonight. I'm happy to hear that. But we can even hear from these employees in this latest leak from Veritas, they don't like her. You see how... let me put it this way. It's how I see it. The media providing legitimacy to extreme positions in the name of profit while they're believing their own fake news. And it results in people on the ground level being scared to speak up against groups like Antifa who call for overt actions against the police. That cannot be. We cannot have that. Fortunately for moderates and conservatives, we have no problem calling everybody out all the time, right? It's not happening on the Democrat side so long as CNN lives in their weird world of conspiracy nonsense of Russiagate for years. They won't have on conflicting personalities, and neither will MSNBC. Glenn Greenwald called out MSNBC for not booking him because he wouldn't toe the Russiagate line. You see how this all feeds into the insanity. So this is what I end up seeing. Regular people, this is amazing to me. I keep hearing about regular people who are fans of mine. And I was like, really? A college professor? That seems unlikely. No, because regular people are just scared to speak up. So do I think the Democrats support Antifa? No. I think because of the media's defense of Antifa, or perhaps even the media is scared of Antifa, I don't know. But because they've put people on the air defending them, because their highest level personalities have defended them, and then because Antifa threatens to, take action against people, of course everyone's going to start bending to the far left. Enough is enough. If the Democrats don't stand up to these extreme positions, they're never going to win. And this is what's going to happen. These far left activists are essentially holding the left hostage, but it's a catch-22. Until the media stands up and says no, until the Democrats stand up and say no, it will only get worse. I'll leave it there. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. youtube.com/TimCastNews, and I will see you all there.